Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Garrett from Business Review, and I'll be your host today. It is our pleasure to have Nymi with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled Mind the Gap, Security and Privacy. Today's guest speaker is Phil Chang, Director of Marketing. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We'll allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. And please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance. And you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides. But now, please allow me to welcome Phil Chang.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining me. I'm pretty excited to do this with you today. We're going to talk about security and privacy, two competing priorities, and some of the things that are hidden in the gap. A little bit about, this webinar is brought to you by Nymi. Nymi makes workplace wearables that blend biology, cryptology, consumer technology into solutions that bind the human to the network in a secure, private, and seamless way. We are a Toronto-based startup. We have offices in London and Boston, and a lot of our customers are pharmaceutical manufacturing companies and some smart cities in the Middle East. We have a kind of a wide variety of customers that work with us. I'm Phil Chang. I am the Director of Marketing. I've worked for folks like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer in the past and many other packaged goods companies. I am really attracted to, what attracted me to Nymi was just how, we're starting to change how things are done in pharmaceutical space and, at least pharmacy as I know it and how manufacturing's done. So I'm pretty excited about that. Today, we're going to do a couple of things today. It's a pretty packed schedule. We're going to talk about digitization. This is just a setup slide so we can kind of get into how privacy and security interact, what really is the issues there. And then we're going to talk about what you can do about it as well. So how do you make them work together a little bit better? So let me get right into it. I think, with digitization, or Industry 4.0, Pharma 4.0, whatever you want to call that revolution that's happening, it's been about data and data exhaust and things like ERP and manufacturing, CRM systems, and then adding analytics from machine learning, deep learning, those sort of things to help make better business decisions and even build a completely new business model. So a really good example of how this works, Janssen, which is part of the J&J group of family companies, built a product called Neutrogena 360. This is an app that's online. This is a consumer-facing app, but really serves to illustrate how all of these things come together. So this uses AI to track your skin's progress over time, give you information about your skin's actual needs and health. This eventually leads to personalized skin care. And so when you first open up the app, you're kind of prompted to take selfies. And so that's kind of the IoT of things. That's the selfie camera, taking pictures. You take pictures of the front and sides of your face. The images are then analyzed by Neutrogena's database with about 10,000 other selfies from a different range of age groups and ethnicities. So this is cloud computing, taking that information off your phone, crunching down large amounts of data. And then the actual app gives you a score between 1 and 10 in 5 areas: dark spots, fine lines, wrinkles, dark skin, dark circles, and smoothness for an overall average. So all I have to say to you is, thank goodness we are on a webinar where you can't see my face. I will not tell you my score. You should try it yourself. So that is the AR part of this, where it's taking all that data it's ingesting and then processing and then, coming up with this score. Then it does one more thing. It takes ERP data, so you're kind of like POS data, SKU level data. It starts to then match it with the recommendations. It assesses somewhere around the range of 100,000 skin pixels. and then generates about 2.5 million individualized product recommendations based on the individual user. So an interesting way of kind of tying this all together to kind of show you how this works. So where this goes that's so exciting is, as the user base grows, you get more data, you get more computing capacity, you get more selfies, you get more information. And this really, this one illustrates how digitization works, but more importantly, it sets up the two players we're going to talk about today. So you're going to see two consistent factors come up all the time as you start to tie these things together. One is security and the other is privacy. So security being, we just talked about mountains and mountains and mountains of data. We're ingesting more every day. Security needs to be able to protect all facets of collecting that information, and then being able to, keep all that stuff together in a secure fashion. And then privacy, right? You've got user data, you've got digital twins of people's faces going on. You've got to be able to keep user information private as well as the different attributes private. So this is how digitization is putting pressure on it. This is why we want to talk about privacy and security and how they match together. Because as you go forward, this is a consumer example, but for most of you who are in B2B space that are in here, the pharma manufacturers, this is going to continue to grow. All of these things are going to continue to grow. So let's jump into security. Security is, something that we've got to worry about. There's a lot going on here. We just talked about all this data, the need for protecting it. The security that companies need now has to protect itself from unknown threats or hackers, but it also has to protect you from inadvertent victims. So your employees, people who are in your business, who are behind your walls, who either are inadvertent victims because they don't know that they're subject to a security threat, or malicious players, unhappy employees, employees preparing to leave, that sort of thing, fraudulent activity going on. So as your surface expands, so do all of these threats inside and out. And so while businesses have been improving, while they've been improving their security, they need to kind of keep looking at all the evolving threats that can happen. A few things that are starting to really test how well security works in organizations. The Internet of Things, so all the devices that you're plugging in, plus trends like bring your own device, cloud migration, and a host of kind of custom apps, SaaS apps, all those sort of things online that you can get. There are lots of gaps for hackers or inadvertent victims to be able to expose your organization. How important is this? The total cost of data breaches in 2019 was about $3 trillion based on a Juniper report, and that same report thinks that it is estimating about a $5 trillion price tag by 2024. So given the rising damages along with cyber criminals' evolving tactics, it's really important for organizations not to protect just against current threats, but also like evolving threat tactics. Two key areas that I've got up here. One is disruption on the left side there. Three things in there to worry about: premeditated internet outages that bring trade to its knees. Second is ransomware hijacks the Internet of Things. And then privileged insiders coerced into giving up their crown jewels. So three really key disruptors that can really hurt the business. The second one is distortion, and these are difficult, right? One is automated misinformation gains instant credibility, and the other one is falsified information compromises performance. So I said a lot there. Maybe the second one, the distortion, is like, what? What do you mean? A really basic example: you get an email from, a senior ranking, a director, a VP, the CEO, the CTO, depending on the size of your organization. The email could be a really simple one that says, hey, I'm in a meeting, you can't call me, but I need this and I need it like ASAP, could you please work on this? Check the file below. You know, maybe 5 years ago, you didn't look at that file. You just opened it and started working on it. Now, your employees need to be savvy enough to know, wait a second, I'm going to check the email. I'm going to check the email header at the top. Just going to hover over it and see if it came from, you know, Bob Smith, CEO. Does the email match Bob Smith, CEO, you know, his email address? You know, does the attachment look funny? You know, you've got to take an extra step now to, you know, to email back Bob Smith and say, hey, is this real? Did you actually ask me for this? You know, because those things now, you know, they're quite sophisticated. They can really expose your organization. Clicking on that email would have opened up, you know, lots of phishing stuff going on, things that cause your business lots and lots of issues. Okay. So, lots of options for security. You know, businesses will protect themselves differently and become more sophisticated in their approaches. As the methods for sophistication get, more sophisticated, the gap grows between how business process for security works and how businesses are supposed to work. So how do you keep business safe and yet not hinder people from doing the work they need to do? And so the example I'll give you that kind of makes this come to life. If you look at the bubble to your left, all the way at the end, the first kind of way to keep your business secure is to use passwords. Passwords are problematic. We don't like them. I'll be clear about that. Passwords are problematic because they've been around since the computer's been around. So that's about 30 years. They are the weakest security protocol. 62% of employees are using weak passwords. So that is my name, my birth date, my birth month. Or my dog's name, my dog's birthday, you know, you fill in the blanks, you know what that sounds like. Or they're using the same password for everything. You know, or 54% of employees are sharing passwords and accounts. So there's lots of weaknesses going on here. And this is to illustrate the point, more than 86% of cyber attacks are the result of people getting tricked out of passwords. You know, so you think of that person who's using the same password for everything. Maybe it doesn't even happen on your site. Maybe it happens on another site. They come to you and they're able to try that password and get in based on just simply that fact that they're using the same password for everything. Okay. The second one to your left is tokens. Tokens are really commonplace, provide really strong authentication. But the issue with this is bring your own device, which we talked about. You know, the challenge with using PKI in today's mobile environment is that a lot of the existing authenticator PKI, they don't work on new mobile devices because they don't have USB ports and they don't have embedded smart card readers. And so, you know, this becomes an issue in terms of, you know, dating the technology and then it keeping you secure. The next two, the top and then the top right, are things that are pretty interesting. They are coming up. We know that folks are starting to use it, but you know, really only maybe half the industry is starting to use these. Is multi-factor authentication and then biometrics. So let's just tackle multi-factor for a second. Multi-factor really requires you to have 2 or more credentials in order to verify someone's identity, and that is that you have to have something that you know, something that you have, and then something that you are. So you need one of the 2 of the 3 things in order to be able to move, in order to be secure. The other one is biometrics. That typically works with multi-factor. It's pretty promising because it is something that you are. You know, not who you are as a person, but who you are biologically. Your fingerprint, your face, a retinal scan, or a voice recognition are the 4 kind of most common biometric technologies out there. The things, you know, there are a lot of options here, but the approach really does matter. When you're using these, the biometrics, what you have to do is, 1, figure out how to keep it safe and a secret. So losing biometric information via data leak or hack makes it a shared secret. Something that you are is not something that you can change. Again, from your fingerprint, losing that or getting it shared, you can't change your fingerprint. And it also needs to be something that you can use in multi-purpose environments. So, as I was looking at the attendee list, before we started, many of you are pharmaceutical folks on the line. Think about these in your production or lab settings. All of these pose some sort of problem. A really simple example I would give you, we're all in COVID times, we're all sitting at home. If you're lucky to sit at home, not have to go to an office or something like that. But gloves and a face mask prove problematic for almost everything on this list. And so as you're thinking through these options for security, it really does matter what you choose. So the last image I want to leave you with is the bottom quarter on the right side. That is the Nymi band. It's the whole reason that we're talking is because we believe there's a different way to do things. We think we make the best use of biometrics. The Nymi band is a digital workplace solution that has multi-authentication with the use of biometrics. So we use the fingerprint to unlock the cryptographic key embedded in the Nymi band, so users can tap their authorization via NFC. Okay, that's about as salesy as I'm going to get. I think what's really important here is that we believe it, and you should too, is that responsible biometric use is really important as you move forward with security. So here's what's hidden in the gap. So we've talked about digitization, how important it is to keep it secure. Hidden in the gap is that businesses are getting smarter, right? We've added IoT, we've connected that cloud computing and AI and ERP. You've seen how that helps like a business like Neutrogena. Many of you have probably similar examples of something like this. But what is really missing in all of this is even as you're plugging in and making the organization smarter, what you're really missing is the farmer worker in all of this, right? There has to be a way for you to be able to track what the farmer worker is doing, how they do it, and what they do, because that allows you to be able to accelerate the process and make it better. We think that using some of these solutions, you can start to get to things like, incident response, right? So if you have a solution, if you have a solution that allows you to be able to isolate and figure out, where people are in times of emergency, with incident response, right? How do you find out who didn't make it out during a fire or an evacuation? Mobile force communication. You want to be able to communicate simple things to people. How do you do that with the solutions that you're using? So these are important things. We think that hidden in the gap is exactly that, is being able to connect the human to this. We're going to do, as I inadvertently showed you, we're just going to do a quick survey. So if you wouldn't mind, using your browser and then clicking on one of these, we are going to ask you a series of 6 questions through this entire webinar. These are all anonymous. None of them are, kind of commitments on your company or any of those sort of things. We just, what we're going to do is compile these pieces of information and then be able to, and then we'll actually give them back to you, the anonymized results for everyone who's on this call, so that you have them for your own organizational purposes. You'll get them in about 2 weeks, along with a link to the presentation, the video, and the actual presentation itself. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds here. If you can click on, what's most important. If you guys are using any forms. Okay. So you guys, so that's cool. So 70% of you, so higher than the industry average, using multi-factor. Only about half the industry right now seems to be using it, and then there is a group that is unsure. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, very interesting, right, to see how things are working. And then it looks like nobody's using biometrics yet. Okay, interesting. I've got a second question here. I'll pop into that. Okay, and I'm going to flip here. Oh, maybe I waited too soon. Maybe a couple of more seconds. What are you worried about more? Whether you're worried about outside threats or inside threats. I don't know if I triggered anything there. Most people are looking at outside threats and you know, data hacks and things like that. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I clicked too soon. Usually Garrett does this, and I kind of insist on taking over, so you're doing it with a newbie on questions. But 83% interesting. Worried about outside and not worried about inside. I would say that is something. I don't think, you know, you've got to worry about that too, the inside threat, because they don't always know what they're looking at. Is where I think the real issue is with inside threats. But thank you for that. That's amazing. Okay, so I just covered all sorts of things hidden in the gap that I think we should be tracking, and that is immediately going to bring up privacy. So is it a competing priority? We don't think so, but the perception is that it may be. The employee might think it is. Three of the things that really come up in here: collecting, storing, using data. These are like really common questions that employees have about what you're doing, and the employee, you know, may or may not think this, but it's pretty common. So what I've left up here is an excerpt from a blog article called "Your Boss is Watching," and the tone of the article is one of mistrust. It is about, what are they watching? Stop doing things that they can track. You know, turn off your history. Don't let them see what you're doing. The funny thing is that a lot of these things are really good IT security hygiene things that you should be practicing. You know, things like cleaning up your social media account. That's really key, because you don't necessarily want to be able, you know, if you're taking a selfie at your desk, you know, let's say it's for the Neutrogena 360 app, you don't necessarily want to capture the screen behind you that you might be working on that may or may not be proprietary. You know, most of the pharmaceutical folks don't allow any sort of cameras in their plants, you know, again, for fear of you know, showing off something proprietary. So that's a really good IT sanitary check, you know, and then separating work and personal devices, again, really good IT protocol for, one, keeping your life private, and then two is keeping it out of the workplace so you don't bring outside influences that the company can't control. You know, never use the employer's hotspot is another one that's really good. But you know, from the company side, it's about, look, don't introduce new threats. This article is slanted far more towards something sinister, where they're watching, they want to know what you're working on. You know, so there's some really good things in here, but the employee clearly will worry, you know, as you move down this path of connecting things and then adding the employee, they're going to worry that the things that you're doing on security really put them or expose them on the privacy side. And I've got a really good example of how this works. So this survey is taken from companies that reside in four different countries: UK, Australia, Canada, US. It's a pool of 2,500 employees that got surveyed, and they were of employers who were planning on tracking locations at work, so tracking their employees and their locations at work. When the employees were surveyed before they started these tracking programs, the 2,500 answered, and you can see that they were overwhelmingly negative about getting tracked at work. You know, UK, Australia, and Canada all came up, you know, 50% or higher on the negative side, and then 38% negative in the US, and then very, very low on the positive scale, that tiny little gray sliver, and then neutral in the middle. When they drilled down in the survey and they asked, you know, what were your primary concerns? For the folks in the UK, they were worried about privacy. In Australia, they were worried about privacy. The Canadians were worried about micromanagement, and then the US was worried about data usage. Now, I'll just stop for a second because we had that question, privacy and data use, what's the difference? Privacy is actually about getting the data and what they're collecting from you, and then data usage is what are you using it for? So maybe I don't have a problem with you taking it from me, but collecting it from me, what are you using it for? Okay, so these were the top concerns. When they did some education and then they went through the process and started getting them tracked at work, they were asked again, they did the same survey again, and the top concern now has changed. Well, for some change. So the folks in the UK were steadfast. They were still worried about privacy. But the Australians had moved from privacy, understanding why you needed to collect it, but they were worried about how you're going to use it. The Canadians and the Americans flipped from anything private or data usage to battery usage. Like the thing that you're using to track me, is it going to last all day? Is it effective? How do we increase functionality? Which is, really a full 180 if you think about it. And then more importantly, when they asked about the same kind of attitude or mentality around it, the experience was completely different. So even for the folks in the UK, where privacy remains a constant concern, they've completely flipped their attitude. So 54% were positive about the experience, 42 were neutral, and only 4% were negative. So privacy is often a misunderstood thing. While it's not a competing priority, it can be if your employees don't understand what it is that you're doing, why you're collecting it, what you're trying to do with it. So education and disclosure to open up dialogue is really important in this exercise. This grid lays out really principles that you'll see in GDPR, and the way it's laid out, when you look at GDPR, you'll see all the essential elements of privacy that you see here. The top three concerns that we took this from a study called Employee Privacy in a Mobile Workplace. When you get this presentation, you'll get the links here, so I'll make sure you get all the references to what we're talking about. Privacy, the top three kind of ranking things that employees were worried about. Two of them were in user identity. One was around collecting, so how much were you collecting? Do you need all that data? Really only collect what you need. And then what were you doing with it? The secure encryption part of it, how were you storing that information? They wanted to know it was being safe. And then the other one was on the far end on transparency and disclosure tracking. So, letting employees know what the information is being used for, which is, mirrors that study that I just showed you. So these are kind of like, everything on this grid is important, but these were the top three concerns that most employees had in this report around, education and disclosure and what you're using information for. So at this point, I wanted to ask you two more questions. This first one, how do you feel about your policies around collecting information on employees? I'll give you 10 seconds to answer that. Okay, let's have a look at some of those answers. Oh, give you a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds, sorry. You can tell I'm not as skilled at this as Garrett is. Garrett's definitely, he's giving me some coaching on the side, but I think I'm rushing you guys. I apologize for that. Interesting. So some really good answers here. Clear policies, our employees understand. That's great. I don't know what our policies are is, like if you're in a company like that, you should probably go and find those. And give them feedback so they understand, so folks understand if you're managing that, there are definitely some best practice ways to be able to communicate that. You can definitely ask me in the FAQs or we can or at the question and answer at the end, or we can help you with that as well. I'm going to give you another question here. Are you currently monitoring employees or employee activity? I'll wait a little longer here. Okay, so let's see. Okay. Okay, so quite definitively no plans. Okay, interesting. Great, thank you for that. Okay, so let's move to what you can do about this. So how do you make a compelling argument of security and privacy working together? So first thing is there's a motivator to get this right. So to close the gap, we talked about a little bit of this, is these kind of 4 quads, the digitization stuff you're doing in the industry, it's netting you out connected processes, connected assets, connected devices and scanners, and then connected value chain. That's really important. You know, those things are starting to pull things together. You're starting to process information. You're starting to get to moments where you can figure things out. Getting the employee plugged in properly, you know, privacy and security, you know, securely and then privately, helps to accelerate the digitization process. So it's really the next step to being able to grow. It helps you understand how the employee weaves through each of these, you know, because in every process, in every the interaction with an asset, the you know, interaction with devices and scanners, and then all the way through the value chain, there is a digital pharma worker who is authorizing things, who is tweaking things, who is working on the line. You want to make sure that you can see what they're doing so that you can continue to optimize the business. So a couple of things that you can do to make sure that you know, you're getting this right. So I'm going to take a step back for 1 second and just ask you guys to take off your company hats for a second. Think of yourself like a consumer. One of the, you know, outside of COVID and talking about COVID, one of the other really prominent kind of topics that continues to show itself is data breaches. And again, based on the attendees, I saw many of you are pharma. If you were traveling pre-COVID, you were probably, you know, your company probably uses a chain of hotels. I can tell you that, you know, during my days, I used Marriott and continue to use Marriott to travel even with my family and with work and all those sort of things. In 2020, Marriott exposed the information of 5.2 guests based on the login credentials of 2 employees. So somewhere on the dark web right now, somebody knows that I, you know, prefer 2 queens in my room. I prefer a non-smoking room, and I prefer a room that's far away from the elevator, which is fine. I don't even know what that's worth on the dark web. They probably didn't need to put it on the dark web. They could have called me and I would have told them that. But what comes with that is they now know, you know, things about me that I probably didn't want them to know. Maybe they've got some credit card information. They've definitely got a password that I've used. So hopefully I didn't use it somewhere else. They also have, you know, all sorts of, you know, personal information, addresses, maybe family members, you know, all sorts of that they may not have known about me before. And they've now got, you know, the ability to extrapolate where I was and where I might go, especially if they're using any of the AI things or cloud-based computing stuff that, you know, that everybody else is using. So if that doesn't make you feel vulnerable, the other one hits even closer home. So the credentials of over 500,000 Zoom teleconference accounts were found on the dark web and hacker forums. They were on sale for about 2 cents a piece. And that was email addresses, passwords, personal information, URLs, and host keys. So again, some very alarming moments, right? So the reason I asked you to take off your company hat and think about yourself as a consumer for a second is you are now, you know, people are wondering if anyone can keep their safe. Every time that you think, you know, the data breach is over, somebody else shows up and says, you know, we've been breached, we exposed a little bit more of your information. And so, you know, as you you move forward and you build your security and you build how you track things, you want to make sure you're really clear about where their personal information resides. They need to know that. You saw that from the grid. They need to know where it is, and they need to know how much you have of it. They need to know that they can opt out of a network and being tracked. So before you say, "Whoa, wait a second, that's not a thing," in that survey that I showed you above, where they were being tracked, and they did go through all of those things. Where are you being tracked? You're being tracked at work. How do you leave it at work? How do you not take it home? All those sort of things. There are always consequences for opting out of tracking. Every company, has its limits on, here's what we're willing to give up and here's what we're not. But it makes for the proper conversation to have with users so they understand what's happening and they understand where and where not. And then the last one is something we've already talked about, compliance or educational training. So compliance training is required for audits and things like that. You do want to make sure that you have clear and easy to read policies on what you're tracking and what is, and what is important. So visibility helps companies, employees understand what company policies are, and then it helps to make security a company priority and not just an IT priority. We really believe this. We think that biometrics is, proper use of biometrics is really key. Many of you are using multi-factor now, and nobody's using biometrics. As you get into it, you got to think about that. Here's an example. The makers of BioStar, which is a security system with a fingerprint reader, for doors and floors. In 2019, BioStar makes a security system that is in commercial facilities in the US, UK, Japan, India, and the UAE. So lots of places. In 2019, their information got exposed, and there were fingerprints of more than 1 million people in that database. And so this is kind of the worry about biometrics is if you're going to use it, you need to store it safely. You need to know, as an employee, I need to know it's safe because now if I'm part of BioStar, my fingerprint is on the net. It's what I am. It's not something I can change. So that becomes a shared secret, we call it, and it's really dangerous, okay? So we just think that as you go through this, having these things helps you to make, one, your policies better than also, having the user understand what your policies are. The last thing is making secure easier. So adopting solutions that are simpler for the end user. So in today's day and age, the average worker would probably tell you they don't do one job, they do 2.5 jobs. That's a common complaint. But whatever the job description is, they now need to think about protecting your data. They need to avoid pop-ups. They need to watch for unknown emails and links. They need to use strong password protection. So 9, 12, 14 digits, capital, symbol, a passphrase. They need to connect to secure Wi-Fi. They probably need to use a VPN. They need to enable firewall protection at work and at home. They need to stay on top of security updates that need to happen. They need to back up files. And then they still need to talk to IT departments, and then they still need to embrace education and training. It's a lot for an employee to be thinking about all the time. It's a lot, on top of the job, on top of, many of you are in pharmaceuticals, so, adverse event training, all the compliance training that comes as well. This is over and above all of that. So it's a lot for users to think about. And then the other side is, you think of what they're carrying with them. They're carrying, passwords, so the average employee has about 191 applications, 191 passwords they got to worry about in some shape or form. They probably need a pass card for the door. They have an ID card they've got to carry. They probably have a PKI token. If they are a remote worker at all, they've got keys or pins or more PKI tokens or more secure ID cards to get into doors. And then they've got their phone, at least one phone. A lot of corporate policies still carry 2 phones, So there's a lot for users to worry about. And so you've got to think about your solutions, your end solutions, and think about, how to bring those together to make it a little bit simpler for your employee to be, to be safe, and then to adapt the proper security protocol. So at this point, I have finished the parts on security and privacy. We would love to hear your feedback on this. But one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to show you what we do. And then I'd like to, how we think about things, and then we'd like to ask your feedback. There's 2 more questions we'd like to ask you so that we can continue to build and grow on what we do. There's nothing at this point, if you're worried about, there's nothing salesy in here. This is really an educational piece on how we do it, why we fit in, and why we care so much about security and privacy. The things that we've done and covered so far, security and privacy, these are kind of like pillars on the way to enabling the digital worker. And, security and privacy are the first 2. The reason security is so important, for all the obvious reasons we talked about today. And then the other one is that you have confidence that you can ensure that that person is who they say they are, is really important to be able to move forward. You have a confidence that it's not just somebody with those credentials, but it's actually the person that that is doing the work. That is incredibly important for security. The privacy, we've talked about that today. That's what this whole thing is about. The third is natural UX, and that's really important. So think of active workers. Think of folks who are moving, in and out of all your connected processes, your assets, your doors and floors, and signing off on things. It's really important to have a really natural way for them to be able to do that, so that one, you can incorporate their actions into your digitization, and then also be able to give them flexible ways to be able to do that. We believe that the next step in this is telemetry. That's about the analysis of what they're doing. So, as they move through these, how do you make it more efficient? So how do you take the data that they're providing you on where they are, what they're doing, and be able to fine-tune your digitization engine to be able to move forward and then grow the business. Lastly in there, in order to get to enabling the digital worker, is really a network, and that's really a network of 2-way communication that's monitoring and sensing of workers as they move through the environment. That's also being able to allow them to communicate with each other, so that you're able to get the best kind of results out of the workday. This is the Nymi band. The Nymi band, you can see, is it's got a real like Fitbit look and feel to it, but it's really different from a Fitbit. It's packed with operational technology. It's clean room ready. You can go swimming in it. It's designed to be cleaned by cleaning solvents, but it also is designed not to pick up dirt and bacteria and things that you don't want in clean room environments, if that's what you want to use it for. It's also wireless, so you don't type with it. It uses Bluetooth and NFC, so that when you walk into spaces and when you tap on a reader, you get acknowledgement of specific actions. Like in pharma, when you're doing e-signatures, you can use the band in order to tap on an NFC pad to sign an e-signature. And you can do that with protective gear on. You think of our COVID times and wearing masks and gloves and everything like that. You can authenticate the band, put on your gloves, and do the work that you need to do. Each band is assigned during enrollment to a single user. The band can only be authenticated with the fingerprint biometrics. So on the left side, you'll see in the middle there's an authentication or a fingerprint sensor. This is very much like what you would find on your Samsung phone. You would put your finger in there. On the outside of that is an ECG sensor that tests for liveness. So, in combination with the on-body sensors, you would put it on your arm. You would, the on-body and the ECG would confirm that it's on your body, and then you would put the fingerprint in to authenticate and activate the band. And then those combined give you a really strong chain of trust, so that you know and you can ensure that person is the right person wearing the band. And then the on-body also allows you to be able to, when if you take off the band, let's say you take off the band and you leave it, if you're a commuter and you leave it in a train station or you leave it on your living room coffee table, nobody can use it. The band isn't active until you put it on, it senses it's on your body, and then you put your fingerprint to authenticate it. The minute it comes off your wrist, it deactivates and it's not really good for anything. Okay. How do we use this and why we care about all of the digital, enabling the digital worker? This is the ecosystem that we're already integrated with. At the top is the cloud. Things like Ping and Avidian bookend this. They are single sign-on types of tools that allow you to access pretty much anything in your space in terms of logging in and out of things. Next down this list is ERP, or kind of like enterprise systems, so SAP or Windows. We have doors and floors in there with HID as well, so you'll be able to open doors and floors and elevators and all those sort of things. And then as you move down the list, we have labs and MES environments. So that's a lot of, the world of, I need an e-signature, I need to be able to tap on things, I need to be able to sign off on things, but now you're not using a login and a password. You're now using a tap instead. So you would authenticate your band, you would tap, you would authenticate your band and leave it on all day, and then you could tap on as many things as you need to sign off on while it's underneath your PPE or any of those sort of things. And then at the bottom of this list is really hardware providers that can help us get this stuff done. So where I'm going with this. So thank you for sitting through just a little bit about who we are. The other parts that we'll focus the last set of questions on is there are some additional usages here that we think would be really useful for the environments that we're going into, the conditions that we're going into. A few that we've already heard, and we'd love to get your input on this too. One is social distancing, reminders. So, as we're coming out of post-COVID times, wherever, not post-COVID, but as we're coming out of social distancing or stay-at-home measures, depending on where you are, there's been a lot of talk about how do you remind people to stay 2 meters or 6 feet apart. The band does some of this stuff. Anytime that you come within 6 feet, I'm back on the factory floor and I forget, and I want to go see my friend Garrett, who's working at a different station. The band reminds you when you are you're hitting 6 feet, so that I don't get so excited and I'm right up beside Garrett and talk to him and hanging out. The other one that's really useful in there that we've heard is social distancing from a forklift. So this sounds odd, but in manufacturing environments where you've got, lots of heavy equipment moving back and forth, there is some benefit in warning you that, hey, you know what, there's a forklift moving at a decent clip coming around the corner from you. You should either stop or just be aware that somebody is coming. The third one here is about the lone worker. This is very much about, folks that are out in locations where they're working on their own. A lot of protocols say that, in 30 minutes, every 30, we require you to check in. So we know that you're okay, that everything's fine and that you're not facing any conditions that you need to worry about or that you need assistance. But what happens at, if it's check-in plus 3 minutes, 4 minutes, all the way up to 25 minutes before the next check-in. The telemetry on the band, the Nymi band, allows you to be able to see, did they fall down? Have they not been moving for a long time? Are they non-responsive? Some of those things that we think would be really helpful from a health and safety perspective. The last two, so one is around back tracing, which is really tied to COVID. You have an employee who's come into to work and they test positive. They may have been asymptomatic for 14 days, 15 days before that. Now you've got to go back and figure out everyone that they may or may not have been in contact with. The band would help you with that as well, be able to figure out some of that stuff so you can quickly move on that information. And then the last one is really around process optimization. So spaghetti mapping, efficiency, things like that. If I'm moving through stations A, B, L, and Z, or Z, how do how do you figure out how to either lay out your, my route better so I'm more efficient, or are there things that you can task to me to tweak along the way because I have to be passing things that I'm certified to work on. So those are kind of like additional use cases that we think are incredibly interesting. What I'd like to just, if you'll indulge me, is I have a couple more poll questions and then we'll wrap this up, is, excuse me, one, which one is the most valuable to you today? Again, think about this from, this is anonymous, so, nobody's going to go, hey, you said to me. So give that a think and think, are there one of these that would be really interesting for you and your company? So the, social distancing, COVID, and then social distancing with a forklift, back tracing, lone worker, process optimization. Just a couple more seconds here. Okay, so yeah, really interesting. Social distancing with COVID is really high. That makes a ton of sense. And then yeah, process optimization again makes a lot of sense to us. I guess the note here is, most of you answered that you had no plans to start tracking. So process optimization comes with the tracking, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to do that. So just make sure that, you're kind of reconciling the two, because without tracking some sort of way, you won't get to process optimization. Okay, and then I have one last question for you. Which one do you think users would have the most difficulty accepting? Again, the answers are, the options are the same. So social distancing, reminder in COVID, social distancing with a forklift, back tracing, lone worker, and then process optimization. Okay, just give you a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's see. Back tracing. Okay, that makes sense, right? Who they've interacted with, where they've been. I can see how, based on the privacy conversation that we've had today, I can see how that could be something that would be some worry. Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, so this concludes the questions I have. I really appreciate you doing this. As I said at the beginning, if you missed it, we've collected now 6 questions from you with answers. We're going to summarize and analyze those results and get you something back in about 2 weeks, if not sooner. You'll also get, the video and the presentation as well. Just to wrap up, the 3 things that are really important, digitization continues to create pressure to have data secure and data private. How you protect your business matters. So as you consider threats and things that are, that are pushing the business, make sure that you consider the end user's requirements and then the ease of use and the security tools that you choose. And then what's really key and what's really come through in some of these poll questions is privacy is incredibly important. And so make sure that you make privacy a tangible moment for the user. This is something that we don't take lightly. If you want more on this, please, ask us and we can help you with that. We think that responsible use of biometrics and responsible use of data is really key to having this happen. We've got about 6 minutes left. I'm going to quickly turn this over to Garrett, and then if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you very much, Phil. Just a reminder for you guys, in order to ask those questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We'll have a look at the questions coming in now. Perfect. So I have a question here from a user. The user says we use biometrics as well as MFA.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's, you know, that's a, I guess it's not really a question, more of a comment, but I really love that. I think, you know, that's a really safe way to do it. You know, multi-factor, you know, MFA is multi-factor authentication. And so if you're using, you know, any one of the two, right? So, you know, what you know, who you are, you know, is really important. So having both is incredibly important. I think that makes you really, really secure. So yeah, thank you for the comment. You know, for the asker of this, I guess we would love to understand from you some of the processes that you use to choose the results that you got. I think that would be incredibly interesting, you know, for us to be able to figure out. We would probably turn that into something that helps other folks in terms of how you selected what you did.
Thank you very much. While you still have us here, make sure you get those questions in while we just prioritize these questions for you.
Well, I guess that's it. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you spending the time with us, and then we really you know, we really appreciate you spending the time with us. And as I said, I'll make sure we get those survey questions back to you so that you have them for your organization or whatever you need to use it for as well. And then we would love to continue the conversation. So if you are like this person who uses MFA as well as biometrics, we would love to hear from you, understand how you went through that process. There's probably some things that we can share in there as well. And then if you have any questions on security or privacy, how you help your employees to understand, you know, what your policies are, we're here to help as well. We think those are incredibly important conversations to have.
Yeah, and further to that, let's leave you to thank Phil for it was a great presentation, and to Nymi for sponsoring the session. To the attendees, you'll receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. You can ask further questions there if you think of them. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned, and follow us on Twitter @BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a nice day.